Okay, here it is, part 2. Let's see if we actually diagnose this problem correctly by looking at the first look sensor, the map sensor, and the insulator pressure transducer. As I explained in part 1, my suspicious was that intake valves on cylinder number 3 are not opening and we are having excessive vacuum in a cylinder. However, our vacuum in intake was lower, and that's because something in between it's not opening, and the only things in between are the intake valves. However, this being a overhead cam engine with basically 2 intake valves and 2 exhaust valves on each cylinder, it was very odd to me that both valves could be off. And after I removed a intake manifold, I looked down into the valves on the cylinder number 3, which are these here. And we can see fuel sitting on top of the valves. Okay. And what I did actually, I removed these 2 fuses here. They are for injectors and coils, and I would crank the engine over, 4 or 5 times, but that fuel still sits on the valves, which tells me that valves were not opening. At that time I did not have a cover off yet. So however, then I checked the other ones. I checked these on the cylinder number 2. I put the mirror on to look back, and everything was fine. However, when I looked cylinder number 1, we can see there's a fuel on valve that's on the left side. It's sitting one on the right side. It has no fuel. One on the left still has a fuel on it. Now cylinder number 5, which is this one, it's okay. This one is fine. So I was surprised to see that. I said, do I have more than one problem? And here's the stuff that I took off, and here's a engine cover. And you can see how much sludge is on it. I mean, it's very significant. And then this is what I took out of the head. 1, 2, 3, 4 rocker arms came out of it. Now the question is, what cylinders are on? I know that my number 3, had a problem. However, we have more cylinders here that actually having a problem. Now, as I said, that we had a fuel on top of these valves. Now these valves are not opening at all, and again, to me it was a little confusing. What I've seen on my waveform, how is it possible that we don't have any air coming into the cylinder even though we have 2 valves in it? However, both rocker arms from that valve are gone. See if I can move my light. Okay, so there's supposed to be rocker arms on top of the valves, and both are gone. However, there's something else going on this cylinder number 3. The rocker arm from exhaust valve 1 is gone as well. And there's another one is still there. So that's why we, and this is something that I really didn't see, or I don't even know how to actually recognize on the waveform on these type of engines when one valve is not functioning and the other one is still working. I could see my exhaust, pulse on my insulator pressure transducer, but it looked okay to me. So anyhow, now let's look at the cylinder number 1, As we know now, this valve still has a fuel setting on top of it, and of course that rocker arm is gone as well. You can see right there, that rocker arm has been pushed out. And now there's the other one is still on it. It's really tough there, you can see. You can see the other rocker arm on the other side is still on that cylinder. Okay guys, what I did actually, I captured some waveforms from 3 cylinders. Number 3 that we have the biggest problem on, number 1 that has one intake valve that's not opening, and then I did number 6 on the front bank that's actually no good one. When it comes to these waveforms, it really comes to the science to really understand every single detail on these waveforms. It's kind of like ignition waveforms. You know, more you do, better you're gonna get with it. So I will do the best I can to. I'm gonna explain what I see. That we're gonna compare these 3 waveforms and see if we can recognize some issues that each cylinder had. Of course, we do know that our number 3, you know, that it's not sucking any air. We actually were able to figure that out even before we got into before we accessed the camshafts and rocker arms and all that. Okay, now I have 3 waveforms here. This is a number. I could not lay over all of the. It would be just too crowded. I'm just going to get rid of these. I'm going to leave my. So this is a good one, okay, and compression on a good one is 136 psi. Okay. It's a peak compression. This is at the idle. Okay, so I did some measurements here. I put my cursors, and I was looking at the. So one of the things that I noticed, you know, there's a significant difference in the exhaust waveform between this cylinder and number 3. Now I was trying to figure out how, you know, the degrees when the exhaust valve opens on this cylinder, and I placed my cursors, you know, right at the peak of the compression stroke, and just make sure, yeah, they're pretty close. By placing two cursors, I think this is when exhaust valves is opening. I just simulated it over. There you go. And it seems like 40, 41. Maybe a little bit closer here. Okay, I guess that like 38 degrees before bottom that center exhaust valve opens on good cylinder. Something else. When we look at the, let's see, this is the, which one is this one? Yeah, okay, so. Now when we look at the expansion, the bottom of the expansion stroke and the intake stroke, these two should be symmetrical on most of the cases. And this is, now I'm going to place the cursor here, okay, here and here, and the difference is like 1.2 psi. It would be like I don't know, 2.4 inches of vacuum on good cylinder. And so let's go to. So let's go to a number 1 that has a one cylinder that's not, one intake valve that's not opening. Now we know that compression, what was the compression of this one? 138 or something like that, 138. Yeah, 138 psi was compression on this running compression on number 6, the non-good one. Okay, let's look at the this is now number 1. That now the peak compression. This is the one that has the valve intake one that's not opening. 133 psi, so not much of a difference in compression at all. Seems like that one valve can suck enough air to maintain a good compression. Okay, and now down at the lined up this here. So I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell, but it's right on here. So the exhaust valve seems like it's opening around 37 degrees before bottom dead center, and so the other one was like 38, I believe, right? So that's pretty close. Now when we look at the intake, we can see that actually this one kind of leans down a little bit more. Could that be a reason why? Because one of the intake valves are not opening, so we are creating a little bit more of negative pressure during the beginning of the intake stroke. Maybe I'm making stuff up, but I'm just you know, showing what I've seen here. And let's go ahead and place the cursors here and here, and the difference is 2.3 psi, pretty much double than what's on non-good cylinder. We are at it would be like 4.6 psi difference between expansion stroke and intake stroke. This little dip here that we see, you know. So I don't know. This at the end of the day, you know, the way how we can figure stuff up is just basically compare cylinder to cylinder to get some kind of reference to see what is good one, what is not. It's kind of like an ignition waveform. You know, we want to look at the good one, then compare the one that has a problem. So I'm just showing you guys what I have found, and this is kind of interesting that you know, we have this little bit of a more intake negative pressure during the opening of the intake valves on number 1 that has that's restriction on. And now something else, you know, when we look at the on this waveform, where this increase in pressure or decrease in negative pressure in the intake kind of lines up with a compression stroke. And now we know this happens on cylinder number 3. But like if we would have a case where we're losing compression on this cylinder and we have this anomaly happens, you know, this would be because one of the intake valves are not sealing right, and they're pushing the air back into the intake, and at this time our compression would be lower. This would be kind of something that we can rely as well when we lined up our. This is why I think it's very important to have a cylinder pressure and an intake pressure to see how they correlate between each other. And let's look at the one that has a biggest problem, the number 3, and you can see there's a significant difference in exhaust stroke. I don't know if I could ever figure out that one valve is not opening, and also not having anything to push out. There's not air to be pushed out. This could be a reason why it looks like that. But when we measure the time when the exhaust valve opens, I kind of lined up my cursors here, and it's like 29 degrees before bottom dead center, so like a 10 degrees retarded compared to other cylinders. And so this one is 38, so 38, and then as well this one here 37, and then this one is 29. And we can, you know, when we lined up our cursors and this is where the Pico, it's really more, it's so much easier to do these things with a Pico scope than any other scope on the market. I mean, it's just, and of course, you don't have to have automotive Pico scope. You can use, you know, non-automotive Pico scope to you're going to be able to do all these tests. Okay, this is all I want to show you guys. I think this was very interesting case studies. I want to appreciate everyone for great input on the part one. It's just a great way of you know, sharing the knowledge, and so it's just I was really excited. I'm really I feel sorry for the owner of this vehicle. I mean, he put so much money into it. He had a better transmission, and then I guess actually this cylinder head was replaced back in September. No, I'm sorry, back in February, like 5 months ago, and due to a jump timing, and now he, you know, put so much money into it, and now the car has 200,000 miles, and you know, putting more money into this engine just doesn't it's not suitable. And I believe it's the, you know, being so much sludge in it and all that, it just the engine is not getting enough oil. And this is it. Like, I think you guys, you know, I don't know what else we can do with this. It is what it is, but it's just great. And now, actually, I'm kind of trying to get myself better organized in my files and all that. I'm getting Nick to show me how to do that, so I don't have to struggle looking for the files all the time on the Picoscope. And something that's very, very important is when we work on vehicles and we are gathering the data, it's always good to save it, not only the good ones, the bad ones as well. Because in this particular case, the case that I had, the car that I had back in January, that there was a Suburban, not a Suburban, it was a Chevy pickup truck with Silverado, with an active fuel management system, where one of the intake, I showed you guys that in the first video, the lifter would collapse when we start the engine, but it was kind of interesting that it would not collapse during cranking. It would collapse only when you run. So I was able to gather that data and had a first look sensor in it. And there's one thing that I actually forgot to show you guys. I'm glad I did this again. And anyway, I was able to compare that data, that waveform with this waveform, and then, you know, I was able to kind of come to the conclusion that we do indeed have a problem on a intake valves are not opening. And again, I don't want to repeat myself a million times, but I was really confused at how both valves could be blocked. You know, we had this engine has two valves in it, and we could see that both rocker rounds were off. Now, what I also what I did here, I know there was a little confusing. It was a little confusing last time when we were looking at the waveform. Just going to get rid of this. When looking at this waveform here, it depends what type of first look sensors you have. When you look at the pulse, you know, you don't know if you have because it looks at differential in a pressure, which quite honestly I really don't understand it well anyway, but sometimes this pulse can be a positive pressure or negative pressure. Does it mean is it increased or decreased in pressure? So that can be kind of sometimes confusing. Depends how you, I don't know. But I guess you can just test your sensor, see which way it reacts to the pressure. Now, what I actually did, here's my map sensor, and the nice thing about the Picoscope, you can actually enhance you can do. One of the viewers said we can also do a AC coupled, but also we can simply just change the scale on your waveform to zoom in and zoom out, and also you can do this as well. So see how much we can actually vertically zoom our waveform. Now, what I did with my map sensor, there's somebody was asking me one day how to customize the map sensor, and I actually never used the map sensor that much. It's the first time I used the map sensor. For the reason I used the map sensor because I wasn't 100% sure what I'm seeing on my first look sensor. Is this increasing pressure or decreasing pressure, or the increase or decrease in my negative pressure that I had in my on my waveform. So now every time you see this pulse here, we now know that's the decrease in a vacuum, and that's what actually makes our needle on our vacuum gauge, pulsing. And every time it gets to that point when the intake valve is supposed to open, number 3, it doesn't, and then we actually lose some negative pressure in the intake, and the needle is going to bounce up, and then when other cylinder opens, it's going to bounce down again. And that's what, you always want to see nice and steady vacuum gauge inside a cylinder, so that each cylinder is contributing the same. Now, actually, what I did on this map sensor, you can see that I have actually inches of mercury. I'm sorry, now on my screen, and when I place my cursors here and here, now you can see during the time when my intake valve is supposed to open, my negative pressure was around 11 inches of vacuum, and then but during the time when the intake was supposed to open, then we lost some of that, and it went to a 9. So we losing like 2 inches of vacuum during this event here. We are still in negative in the intake, but you're not going back to atmospheric pressure, but you're losing part of that pulse because of these valves. So what I did actually, let's see, I customized my probes, which seems like I'm not going to be able to show that. Let's see here. Okay, I have to go live actually on this one. It wouldn't let me do it. I had to. Actually, I can just show you this. What I did, I made a lookup table on this Chrysler map sensor, and I would just apply the vacuum to my sensor, and I was looking at the voltage, and so at 0 volts, at 0 psi, I had like a 4.4 volts, and then I would apply vacuum to my sensor, like 5 inches of vacuum, and then it would drop down to 3.6 volts. And at 10 inches of vacuum, it would drop down to 2.8. At 15, it would drop down to 2, and 20 would drop down to 1.8. So basically, what it does, every 5 inches of vacuum, the pressure would drop, the voltage would drop down to 0.8 volts. So you can actually make a lookup table and customize your map sensor that way. So you can see. Because some people are a little confused, when you're looking at that, when you look at the voltage, look at that spike, is that increase or is that a decrease in a vacuum? So we know now we're losing vacuum at that point when the intake valve is supposed to open. So okay, and that would be it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I really, again, this was a good case study, and I'm really pushing myself to analyze these waveforms that we can actually easily recognize the problem. This was such a severe problem that it was very recognizable, what the deal was. Now, by looking at these pulses here, we should have, as I said, like 6 humps, but because there was such a huge loss of vacuum here, everything else kind of get just screwed up. Now it would be interesting to see, if you would have a problem only on cylinder number 1, where we have one intake valve that's not opening. It would be interesting to see how will that map sensor or first look sensor will it pick up that anomaly in the intake. I assume it would, because even though it was able to pull enough air to maintain the same compression and as other cylinder, we're talking about this one here, this cylinder here, where if the number 3 would be okay, how this intake pressure would behave, so to speak, to this cylinder when that's partially restricted on intake. So I don't know, but okay. All right, guys, that will be all, guys. Well, thank you so much. You guys, I hope you guys enjoy this case studies. And see you next time. All right, bye bye.